Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a special episode of Unraveling Politics. This is a weekly political analysis show. In these special episodes, I cover topics or unique or niche ideas of my interest that I believe are important for other people to understand. If you ever want me to work on a political or economic topic, please let me know. I read and respond to all comments. So on with the show. So we're going to be talking about taxation this episode, which is a highly volatile and sensitive issue. I've noticed that almost as much as abortion, this is a very sensitive topic for some people, so I'm warning you right now, we are going to be advocating for higher taxes, and I will explain in just a moment. So let's get right into it. So we have often heard that you can't tax your way to growth. Well, as you can see in the title and on the thumbnail, this is not entirely true, and I will prove it in just a moment. Winston Churchill once said, "A nation cannot tax itself into prosperity." Let me explain why some basic data proves that this is false. Sources, as always, are in the description. So take a look at the chart here. It's a few years old. It's from 2022, but I think it will do. If you're listening to only the audio podcast, I will be as descriptive as possible to explain this to you. As you can see, this is a chart of various different countries. On the bottom is the x-axis, and as you can see, it is GDP per capita in 2021 dollars. All numbers are in 2021 dollars, so inflation is not a factor here. Before we go on the x-axis, it is a logarithm. So as you can see, it goes from 1,000 to 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 20 to 50 to 100. It doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a logarithm. So that basically means that the higher numbers are bunched together. On the y-axis, you have a number of a percent of tax revenue as a share of GDP. So you have a chart that compares the GDP per capita, which is the wealth per citizen on average, to the percent of GDP, which is the amount of revenue that the government brings in each year compared to the overall size of the economy. Before I go on, we are not comparing growth here as Churchill was talking about. You don't have a high GDP if you don't have growth. So what do we see here? Well, there are lots of dots all over this map, really. However, if you look where we are at, the United States, we are kind of middle of the pack in terms of percent per GDP, maybe slightly toward the higher end in terms of taxes as a share of our economy. In the year 2022, our GDP per capita was $71,318 per person, and we were collecting a tax rate of 26.8% of GDP. This puts us at a lower tax rate than our European partners, but higher than most of the rest of the world. So according to Churchill, lower taxes is better. So what countries have the lowest taxes as a share of their GDP? Well, let me put on the map of just the African countries who have lower tax rates. Are all African countries the richest countries in the world? Is Somalia secretly a paradise where food is abundant and the streets are paved with gold? I mean, their tax rate is 2.2%. Well, it turns out their GDP per capita is a super duper high number of $1,388 a person. In the United States, that would not even be enough to live a whole week at this point in many cities. Here is a map of only African countries. As you can see, it's not exactly inspiring. Nearly all of them are at the bottom. With the exception of Lesotho, none of the African countries have high taxes. And I guess Tanzania as well. But except for Lesotho and Tanzania, none of them have high taxes, but they all have low GDP numbers. So what does this mean? It means that just because you have low taxes doesn't mean you have prosperity. What about on the other end? Which countries have the highest taxes? Are they suffering like Churchill would have said? Well, here is only the European countries. As you can see, they all have a tax rate higher than 18%. San Marino is an exception to the rule. They are a very tiny population of mostly rich people, and I guess Ireland is also another exception. They have very low corporate taxes, so that brings in a lot of companies from other countries. Nearly every European country is about as wealthy as we are per capita. Some of them are even higher. So what can we learn from this? Does this mean that we should just raise taxes as high as we can? No, there is a correlation-causation thing here. However, no matter how you slice it, having high taxes does not stop growth. It matters what the government spends those revenues on. If we just raised taxes and then held a big bonfire in the middle of the street and then burned it all, it would mean nothing for anybody. The best way to spend these money is on roads, education, bridges, healthcare, broadband internet, schools, etc. And of course, that's politics. How can we best spend tax revenue? And at the same time, there is another part you hear from conservatives: cutting your way to growth. What does this mean? Well, it usually comes from people who believe government is too big and we need to cut our way to growth. It's too bloated. If we just shrink the size of government, then it's going to be more healthy. Except that is not true. It was tried in Greece, it was tried in Spain, it was tried in Italy, it was tried in the UK, and who tried to cut spending post 2008 and only deepened the crisis. There is a reason that young people in Greece and Italy in particular are struggling with some of the highest unemployment rates in the Western world. Then there's the Great Depression here in the States. Early on, President Hoover tried to cut spending and raise taxes to balance the budget, which obviously did not work. It was World War II, a large increase in spending that dragged us out of the Depression. Then you have the IMF. They released a paper in 2013 titled The Distributional Effects of Fiscal Consolidation, which found that austerity programs, austerities when you try to cut government spending and raise taxes, especially during a recession, that austerity programs increased inequality and lowered debt slowly. Then you have the 1990s under President Bill Clinton. We had high taxes, and we ran a budget surplus. A record investment in our country led to a strong economy. It all went to crap about 10 years later, but that's not the point. The evidence is clear. You can't cut your way to growth, and higher taxes does not mean lower growth. So what does this mean? Well, high tax and high spend economies are not inherently poor. In fact, they are often quite rich. So you might conclude, why are conservatives against high taxes and high government spending? Well, it's actually quite interesting because the conservatives of centuries ago, they were not small government conservatives. They were large government conservatives, and they believed the government needed to be large in order to preserve tradition and order. The idea that government should be small has only come into place really about in the last 200 years, maybe even less. And that's more American. That's actually more of a liberal idea than a conservative idea. Our modern conservatives tend to be a hybrid of classical liberals and conservatives. So there tends to be a hybrid here. High tax and high spend economy would require larger government in our lives, which they oppose for various different reasons. And they also believe that government is inefficient and a moral hazard. That's why spending has to be on the right items and not just on anything. So what is my proposal for our country? Well, it is higher taxes. Is it painful? Yes. But other countries have higher taxes, much higher taxes, in fact. And by higher taxes, I don't mean higher taxes on the wealthy, because I think we do need to have higher taxes on every income bracket. Wealthy Americans pay very large sums of money in taxes already. Almost half of all the taxes are paid by the top of income earners in this country. In truth, I would totally redo our tax system if I could, but that's a story for another time. We really need to put record investment into our roads, into our bridges, into our schools, into internet access. This needs to be done. And the Biden administration did a lot of that when they were in office, but instead of raising tax revenue to cover it, they just borrowed, which borrowing is not necessarily a bad thing. If you borrow the money and you're spending on things that can return growth later, then that could actually be a good thing. For example, in your personal life, if you bought a house and you expect the house value to go up, then that would be a worthy investment because as you're paying it back, you're earning equity. Meanwhile, tax cuts are the opposite. We're going to take on the debt now, and we're not going to get much in return later on. So anyway, hopefully that made sense. I hope you enjoyed this episode, short and brief and to the point. Thank you for tuning in as always. I appreciate it very much, and you will hear from me again next week. Bye-bye.